Welcome back to Miss Lisa's biology class, math and science. I usually have Miss Lisa and like, share, subscribe up here because I have a goal of getting 1,000 subscribers. So I don't have to record these videos then upload them, but I could just do like how I used to on Facebook, which was I could do Facebook Live and it doesn't take all the memory off of my phone. That's the hand signal for taking all the memory. So anyway, this is biology. This is a class primarily for homeschoolers. We're using this book, Glencoe Biology, but you don't. If you like the way I explain things, you're more than welcome to be here. And this is not, these ideas are in lots of books, and in fact, if you are doing this book as for a high school credit, if you're doing this class for a high school credit, I recommend you get another biology book too and learn more of the vocabulary. The reason why I use this book is because a younger 8th grade student could do it with no problem. And also the lab stuff is very easily to get stuff for homeschoolers. It's biology an everyday experience, so a lot of the lab stuff is just everyday stuff that you can use. There's 2 labs in each chapter, and one of them is usually just stuff that's pretty easy to get. Like this time we're going to be talking about fungi, and one of the labs is you're looking at a mushroom. You can get that at the grocery store. Nothing fancy at all. You might could get one out in your yard, especially this time of year. It's fall, early fall here. Actually, I think tomorrow's the first day of fall. So there's lots of mushrooms around. It's like mushroom season here in Georgia. And you can probably get one for free. But be careful, some mushrooms are poisonous, so you want to be real careful with that. And we'll talk about that more as we get into it. So what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about Protists and Fungi. And this is chapter 5 in this book. And watch the video. There'll be homework in the description, so be sure to check on that and recommendations for labs and stuff like that. All right. Okay, so Protists and Fungi. What are Protists? Well, Protists is a separate kingdom. Originally it wasn't. You can think of these as single-celled organisms, and some of them are more like animals and some are more like plants. So originally they were just in the plant and animal kingdoms. But then as time went on, they decided there were some of them that were kind of like an animal and kind of like a plant, and they decided to give them their own kingdom. So they have their own kingdom, and we're going to be talking, and then fungus have their own kingdom, and because they used to think they were plants, but then they don't have the requirements of plants. They don't have chlorophyll, and they don't have other plant characteristics. So they ended up getting their own kingdom. So originally there were only 2 kingdoms, plants and animals, and then they started branching, and then it was 5 kingdoms, and now some books have way more than that. So and biologists argue about what it should be. So we're going to talk about the Protist kingdom. These are things that you would see under the microscope, and some of them are animal-like, and they are called protozoa. And proto means first, and zoa means animal, so it's literally first animal. So you can hear that these things were discovered later because they were microscopic. So they were only discovered after microscopes were made and then improved enough. Originally, they couldn't see something like this in the very first microscopes. The very first microscopes, when they thought they were looking at cells, they were actually looking at dead cells that was their cell walls. So only once microscopes got improved, then did they see these things. And you can tell by its name, first animal, it's reflecting the theory of evolution. So the idea was that originally there was primordial muck, and then there were certain conditions on the earth, and that biomolecules got together, and then they got together into a cell, and then the first thing would have been a one-celled animal, and then it got more and more advanced. That's the theory of evolution, that's what is reflected in that name. That's where that name came from. Now protozoa, like other animals, are consumers. If you remember what that means, it means it takes in and digests food. It can't make their own food. To make their own food, they have to have chlorophyll. So they eat. They're classified by how they move. Some of them move with false feet, like amoebas. They just sort of blob out into where they want to go. Some of them have little hair-like things all over them called cilia, and they beat them, and off they go where they want to go. Those are usually really fast. You're going to enjoy this chapter, because you're going to either look through your microscope at some of these things, or you're going to go look on YouTube at some of these things and see how they move around. It's really interesting. It's just amazing that there's this whole microscopic world that is all these little bitty animals living their little lives, and we don't see them, and they're really weird and interesting. Another way that they can move is by flagella. Which is like a long whip. They can have one or two of them, but this long whip is sort of like a propeller that makes them where they want to go. Some of them don't move at all. So it depends on, but that's how we classify them, is how they move. How they reproduce is also, it varies. But with the different organisms we're going to talk about today. But one is amoeba, and it's just like a big old blob with a nucleus. When I was in 3rd grade, I did a science report on the amoeba, and I made one out of poster board like that big. And I spent a lot of time drawing it. I drew all kinds of little stuff in the cytoplasm, and my teacher hung it up off of the ceiling, and it was there for years. She liked my poster, and I remember going back even after I left elementary school and going back, and there was that amoeba still hanging there that I had made. I was so proud that my teacher liked my amoeba. But anyway, amoebas are interesting. They make these false feet. Anyway, how they can reproduce is by fission. Remember, I don't know if I always teach this with chemistry, that fission, nuclear fission, is splitting the atom. And I tell them to imagine a fish, and then your hand, and you're chopping that fish. So you can remember, it's not really fish, but it sounds like it. So if you'll just imagine a fish being chopped in half, you'll remember that fission is chopping in half. So how these protozoa reproduces, a lot of them just pinch themselves in half. Would this be sexual or asexual reproduction? I'll let you think about that while I drink some water. It is asexual. For it to be sexual, you have to have 2 partners. Asexual, organisms can reproduce all by themselves. They can break themselves in half. We're going to talk about budding is another way that these organisms can reproduce. So if you are able to reproduce all by yourself with no help, then that is asexual. One bad thing that amoebas can cause is amoebic dysentery. Do you know what that is? It is diarrhea, and you can die of it. There are many ways to die, but dying by diarrhea is definitely how I don't want to go. No amoebic dysentery. So sometimes when you travel to other countries, they'll say, don't drink the water. And you don't want to get dysentery. You don't want to get diarrhea while you're here. My husband went to Mexico, and they told him, don't drink the water, don't even eat the ice. The area he was going to was very, very poor, and they didn't have municipal water where they add chlorine to it to kill all the bacteria and stuff. Here, where I live in Georgia, we have chlorinated water. They add chlorine and fluorine to try to keep our teeth nice too. So, but in some countries, they don't do that. So sometimes it's not safe to drink the water there, or if you do and you're not used to it, you'll get sick, and then you'll waste your whole trip that you spent a lot of money for being sick in the bathroom, and that's no fun, right? So another one is of these protozoa is the paramecium. And when you're going through and reading all of this, you really need to look at those parts. And while you do the labs, you are going to, in your sketchbook that I had you get, you're going to draw these. I want a nice, beautiful drawn, labeled drawing of an amoeba, a paramecium, as we go through euglena, volvox, all of these things. And if you have slides, I want you to look at them in your microscope and draw them, because it's a skill to learn how to look in a microscope and then know how to draw it. You don't draw 500 little green dots. You try to get one amoeba, one paramecium as big as you can see it and get as much detail as you can and label it. Your teacher doesn't need to know that there's 500 of them. They want to see one good one. And if you don't have a microscope, every bit of this is online. You can find it. You can Google, amoeba, and then look at images, and there they are, and they'll probably already be labeled for you. But if you do it that way, you're not getting that skill of learning to use that microscope, and it really is a learned skill. Every year I go around and I'm teaching this to kids, and they'll come around and say, Miss Blackburn, did I get it? And they've got their slide under there, and nope, they've focused on a piece of lint, a crack, a bubble. And I'm like, nope. And I turn, and there it is. And they're like, how did you find it? And it's like, I've been doing this decades. We won't talk about how many. So, on YouTube, you're not getting that experience of finding that thing and getting it in focus and getting it blown up and getting it centered where you can see it. So if you can do that at all, prepared microscope slides are expensive though. So one little box of them is like $80. So maybe you can find them for cheaper. Maybe you can find them used somewhere. But anyway, that is one thing biology is probably the most expensive of all the sciences, because the prepared slides are expensive, the microscope's expensive, and if you do dissection, the dissectables are expensive. So, but it's really fun. I love biology, and I love this book because it's got great labs. All right, so we talked about the paramecium. So the paramecium it's always said to be shoe-like or slipper-like. It's covered in cilia and moves really fast. It's very common. Last time I taught biology, we lived in a different house. And when I taught it in public school, I taught it last year to homeschoolers. But when I taught it in public school, then we lived on this road that at the end of the road there was a creek, but the creek hit a swampy place just as it got to our street, and it was even called Mud Creek. So it was because it was not a fast moving creek, it's a slow moving creek, and at this point it spread out and it was really just a swamp full of bullfrogs, and just a biology teacher's dream to have this at the end of the street. And so I would be getting ready in the morning real quick, and I'd say to my husband, I need a cup of pond water, and he'd go down there to the end of the street, get a mason jar and scoop out a mason jar full of pond water. And I'd take it to school, and me and the kids, we get out the microscopes to look at, and it was always full of paramecium. And that creek in Douglasville, Georgia is the place where paramecium thrive, because they would be all in that water and they would just be zipping around. They go so fast. It was so interesting. And since then, now I live in a different county, and there is a pond not too far away that I've been able to get pond water from, but it's not as good. It's not full of paramecium. Those paramecium were so good because they were so fast and so interesting, and there were so many of them that the kids could find them, and it was fun because it'd be like, oh, I don't have time to draw it, Miss Blackburn. It's moving too fast. Like, just try to get one, and eventually they'll die, and then you can draw one. It gave its life for science. It's a very noble way for a paramecium to die. But anyway, so so if you had me last year, but probably not if you're watching these videos, we never saw as good a paramecium as we did when I was in Douglas County, and I'd get them out of Mud Creek. Mud Creek in Douglas County, Georgia is full of paramecium, but they're really interesting. Another one that we're going to talk about are ones that are plant-like. There's some more that some of them make spores. They're the sporozoans. Spores are kind of like seeds, but there are certain organisms that can make this little it's sort of like when Superman was put in his little baby pod and shot off of his home planet, little baby Superman. He was in kind of like a spore. He was in this little container that kept him safe until he found a better living condition. And that's sort of what spores are like. They're usually very thick walled, they're sort of round, and this kind of organisms can make these spores, and they can last a long, long time until living conditions are good, and then the spore will dissolve, and then they can go back into going into their life cycles. It's sort of like in sci-fi where people go into hypersleep, you know, and they're in these little pods and they go to sleep and then they wake up thousands of years later and then they're all alive and can do things. People can't do it, but little bitty organisms like yeast and the sporozoans, they can make themselves into spores, and then they, when conditions are favorable, then they'll go back into their life cycle. So very interesting. And then some protozoans reproduce by forming spores, and even if conditions are not harsh, it's just part of their reproductive cycle. Is it's sort of like seeds, and they put them out, and then they can continue on with their life cycle. The sporozoan do not move. They are a parasite, which means that they live off of harming others. So they are harmful to other living things. Malaria is a terrible, terrible disease. It kills millions of people. And it is caused by a sporozoan called Plasmodium. And its life cycle is it goes through a fly, through the tsetse fly, and through the Anopheles mosquito. The tsetse is a different one. But anyway, it goes through this mosquito, and the mosquito bite is part of its life cycle. So for a while, they had gotten rid of malaria. There was a chemical called DDT, and it got rid of lice. There was no bed bugs anymore. There was not a lot of lice was gone. This was a chemical that absolutely wiped out bugs. So that it wiped out the mosquitoes, and malaria was cured. Millions of people were all happy because they weren't going to die of malaria. Well, then there was a book written by a lady called Rachel Carson, and it was called Silent Spring. It was huge because her point was that all of life is connected, and if you get rid of all these insects and hurt them and put this chemical into the environment, then it has an effect throughout the food chain. And in particular, the things at the top of the food chain that only eat meat, these chemicals were getting very concentrated in them, and it was causing a bad effect. So all the birds of carrion, the eagles, the hawks, and things like that were dying out because of these chemicals that were being used against different organisms. It was having an effect on the top of the food chain. So her point was that everything's connected. We can't just destroy the food chain without having an effect. And so if all the birds are killed, we would have a silent spring. If they're, and it had to do with their eggs, were not able to be strong enough. So they pretty much outlawed DDT around the world as a bad chemical. Well, as a result, malaria is all back, and all these millions of people die from it. So then there's other people who say, who cares about birds? It's more important to save people. We should use DDT again. And then there's other people like, absolutely not. It's a terrible chemical. It needs to be banned. But things like hotels having bed bugs, all that's back because DDT is not around anymore. So anyway, it's interesting how there's these issues in biology that are controversial. So, but I think pretty much people have all agreed we're not going to use the DDT. It's too bad of a chemical. We'll deal with the malaria other ways. And so they do all these campaigns to get nets to put around the beds and stuff, but it doesn't work. The nets, the mosquitoes still get in. If you've ever been camping, you got your tent, you keep it zipped up, you still get bit by the mosquito, don't you? So there needs to be another solution. Probably not nets or DDT. So one of y'all need to become a great scientist, inventor, person with a great idea, because malaria is a terrible problem. and it needs a solution. It's not so much of a problem here, in Georgia, but around the world it is devastating. So it would be great to have a cure, some way of stopping malaria. All right, so plant-like protists. So if it's plant-like, what do you think it has? You're right, it has chlorophyll. It makes its own food. So what color would you think of with chlorophyll? Green. That's right. I'm sure you said it. So the plant-like protists, they're very important because they're producers. They produce food, and then things eat the algae, and they eat these plant-like organisms, and also they produce oxygen just like other plants. They produce food. They're extremely important. So you'll be reading about that. So algae is what we're talking about here. They capture light and make it into energy. But where these other organisms that we've been talking about are one-celled, algae can be multicellular. So you can have giant algae things. So this is, even though we learn about it in this chapter, it is not, algae is not. It can be multicellular, and some can be huge. They have nuclei. They have different algae have different colors, just like how all plants aren't green. Different algae have different colors also. So you will see in your book on page 97 a little chart of some different types of plant-like protists. They're not all algae. One is Euglena, and it's like a paramecium that's got chlorophyll in it, and it's got a flagella. You see its picture on page 97. It's one of the ones I want you to look at and draw. Very interesting. Another one is a diatom, also very interesting. They say it's like a hat box. It's got a bottom and it's got a top, and they kind of, can open up. They're tiny, tiny single cellular organisms that live in the ocean, and they're important, but when they die, their little hat box stays, and it's hard. So then those dead diatoms make something called diatomaceous earth, and that diatomaceous earth is in lots of stuff that they want it to have a little grit. So it's in toothpaste, it's in cleansers, stuff like that they want it to be a little bit rough for like scrubbing purposes. Also, though, people buy it. You can buy it here at Tractor Supply. People will put it around their house, and it gets rid of insects. There's all kinds of things it's used for. People like, you can look it up. But anyway, diatomaceous earth is a very healthy, natural thing, and people use it for all kinds of stuff. And it comes from this plant-like one-celled organism, and this is another one you're going to look at because they are really pretty. They're all interesting looking, and I want you to look at those. And even if you have a microscope and you have a slide of them, this is one I want you to look at on YouTube or Google or whatever and see images, because they're very different and they're interesting. So I want you to see them. No, does not look, it's just interesting looking. There's a picture in your book of them too. Another one is the dinoflagellates. They are found mostly in salt water. They're red or brown in colors, and we're going to talk more about them. Green algae you're familiar with. They're kind of like a plant. And kelp is one you might even have eaten. It is, you can buy it, and you can buy seaweed, but you can buy kelp at, in the health food store, and even at our Food Depot. You can buy it like kelp chips, where it's dried out and you eat it, and it's salty, and it's a lot of people eat it. On your Euglena, you'll be looking for the red ice spot on it. There's the diatoms, and you can see how they're all different and pretty. The dinoflagellates are only found in oceans. They can be red or brown, and they are responsible for red tides, if you've ever heard of that, and they can cause fish kills. You don't want to go to the beach when there's been a red tide. Stinky dead fish everywhere. It's terrible. So they can be harmful and kill thousands of fish. Green algae are important. One I want you to look at is called the volvox. It makes a ball, and it's not a single cellular. It's a bunch of them, and it's sort of like a community of single cells all together making a ball with their flagella sticking out, all beating, and they can go where they want to go. And to make a new one, they'll make a new little ball, and then off it'll go. So look those up. All extremely interesting. And I think volvox are pretty too. If you were taking biology with me, it would be one of the slides I would have you look at and draw. Let's see. Some of these algae make long strands and are even like lettuce looking, but like slimy, soggy lettuce, not crispy iceberg. You know, you gotta have the right thing in your head. Very important for food, for oxygen. Also, it's used in the food industry as thickeners. A lot of stuff that you eat that's been thickened, like ice cream, will have this algae stuff in it. But my cousin, she's like, she doesn't like it if it has it in that. She said, ew, it's slimy. And so she'll read the label and make sure that there's no thickeners in the ice cream. She'll only buy it if it doesn't have it. And I was never aware of it. And I just liked ice cream until she told me that. And now I'm like, ooh, I don't like it if it's slimy. And now Melanie has just ruined me to lots of ice creams because of her pointing out that some ice cream's slimy, because she's right, and it's the algae stuff that's in it. There's one called slime molds, and those are very interesting. You'll see those on page 100. They have a life cycle where parts of it, they're like a slimy blob, and other parts, they are kind of like a mushroom, and in other parts, they're like amoebas that can crawl around. So slime molds, and they're very similar to what causes fairy circles. If you ever looked out in the yard and you see a circle of mushrooms, they're not really planted by fairies. Hate to break it to you, it's a slime mold. And it's all huge, all in the grass in the middle, and it makes mushrooms all around the outside. So that same cousin, Melanie, I was telling you about, she gets one. She used to live in my neighborhood, now owns a house in my neighborhood that they rent out. They get one in their yard every year. It's like, oh, there it is. There's the fairy circle, but it's not really fairies. It's a slime mold. Anyway, so not nearly as romantic, but you can read about that. So your lab is, you are going to be looking at amoeba, paramecium, and euglena under the microscope. And so you'll be doing the lab on page 101. Okay, now we're going to talk about fungus. So why was the mushroom invited to the party? Because he's a fun guy. Science jokes and math jokes are few and far between. We have to say them. It's just absolutely, we have to say them while we have. So fungus, mushrooms, things like that. So look, turning your book to page 102. Mushrooms, they used to think were plants. They're not. But they're plant-like. They're made out of these things called hyphae. And they're kind of like roots, but then they're bundled together and they can be like the stalk. So like for your mushroom, what's going into the ground are hyphae, and then what are bundled together are also to make the stalk. Then it's like a mushroom has a cap. Underneath it's got these little line things. They're called gills. They look kind of like fish gills, but that's what is part of the reproductive part that makes spores. They're another spore producing organism. And if you've ever taken a mushroom and turned it over and all this dirt looking stuff is on your hands, that's the spores. I remember one time I kicked a mushroom or something, a huge clouds of spores went everywhere, and then I'm breathing it in and just like, I'm dying here. So watch out kicking mushrooms. Melanie would go get her golf clubs and golf them, and she'd be out there practicing her golf swing on the mushrooms out in her yard. But I don't play golf, and I don't have mushrooms as bad as she does. So we have them sometimes. I just enjoy looking at them in her yard. So you're going to do a lab with those two. You're going to dissect a mushroom. You thought you were going to dissect worms in this class, but you're going to start with a mushroom. that you can buy at the grocery store. Okay, and let's talk about mushrooms. Don't ever eat a mushroom that you don't know what it is. There are people who eat wild mushrooms. You need to be an expert to do that. So don't ever do that unless you are with an expert and they tell you they know this one's good. My mom used to have a neighbor across the street, Catherine, and she was a mushroom expert, and she'd go out and pick ones and eat them, and she didn't die. But I always hear about people who aren't experts, who see a mushroom, they eat it, and they die. So you don't want to die for lack of scientific knowledge. That's just a boring way to die. One time we went on a field trip, being homeschoolers, out to Cave Springs, Georgia, which is a really cool cave that's got a spring in it, and a really cool spring-fed swimming pool. But we went out there for a field trip, and the day we got there, it was a mushroom festival, and there were people from all over who had come to the mushroom festival to learn about growing mushrooms and knowing which ones were safe, and they went on a hike to learn about mushrooms, and it was really cool. And we went around and looked at all the little booths and people selling stuff, but we didn't go to any of the lectures because we had come to see the cave and we wanted to do that. But anyway, it was really cool, and it was something I was interested in. But some of the other homeschool moms was like, you went to the mushroom festival? I was planning on doing that. And I was like, that was interesting. But no, we didn't. We went on accident, not on purpose. But it was interesting. So if you ever get a chance, there are mushroom festivals you can go to and learn all about mushrooms. So that's one way that you can learn which ones are edible and not. But be very careful, because some will kill you. So you don't want to just go eating a mushroom out in your yard until you become an expert. All right, so they also can reproduce through their spores or hyphae. If the piece of hyphae gets broken off and put somewhere else, it can grow into a whole new fungus. Funguses are very important, fungi, for our environment because they are decomposers. So when things die, they need to break down. We don't need everything that's ever lived to be laying around still there. We need stuff to break down. We need birds of prey and things that will eat dead things. We don't want dead stuff all over the place. We want a nice living world, not full of death. Death carries disease. So we need the dead things to go away. And with plant material, one thing that breaks it down are fungi. I grew up in the city. I grew up closer to Atlanta, and we didn't have all the birds of prey, all the critters that we have out here in the country. So things would die in the city, and they would just take forever, like weeks and weeks to decompose and smell terrible. I ran cross country in high school, and one time a big dog died on the path. We had to run through the city. So we're running by all these cars with all this exhaust. And then there were, and so that was hard, running by in traffic. And then there was that dog that died, and we would have to run by him, but we'd try to hold our breath. And you know how hard it is to run miles and hold your breath through part of it? It's almost impossible. But we'd do it just to try to get by the dog, who took forever to decompose. And he did very, very slowly and smelled terrible, terrible. And finally he was just bones, and finally he didn't stink anymore. But that dead dog was just there for a couple of months. And now that I live out in the country, there is no dead dog on the side of the road for months. We have vultures, we have turkey buzzards, we have coyotes. There are plenty of things out here that will eat the dead thing, and dead stuff are gone just like that. And one time I hit a deer. It was a deer ran out, and I hit it on the head really hard, and it died. It's sad, but it died. And so there it was, a clean head blow on a deer, and the pickup truck behind me stopped and got him, threw him in the truck. So even the deer don't last around here. There'll be somebody who'll take the deer that I killed. I didn't want it. He can have it. But my kids really laughed about that. They were like, Mom, we're going to get you one of those deer stickers that you can put on your van for every deer you kill. And I'm like, that is the only one I ever plan on killing. But so I wouldn't let them put the deer sticker on my van for the deer I killed, but it made a big dent. But anyway, even hunters will take the dead things off the side of the road if it's a good looking deer that the only thing wrong with it is it got smashed in the head by my van. All right, so back on track. So yeah, dead things that would build up, but some fungus are bad. You don't want fungus on you. Some are harmful. Athlete's feet, ringworm, lots of funguses you do not want. Um, and like people can die of fungus. You go to the hospital, you get a fungus in your lungs, and you can die of this. So funguses can be very bad. And one thing that seems to help people not get fungus is having a healthy immune system. But also you want to nip it in the bud. As soon as you see a little athlete's foot, you need to go ahead and get that medicine and get it on there, or use a natural remedy, but you don't want it to get out of control. It can be really a problem. Toenail fungus is really, really hard to get rid of. They've got new treatments though, so talk to your doctor. If you're having a fungus problem, talk to your doctor or your mom if you're a student. So anyway, there's different kinds of fungus. One is sporangium, meaning it makes spores. Bread mold is one of those. And do you know bread mold is not poisonous? So when my brother was in college, when he took biology, his teacher had a piece of bread that was just covered in mold. And for sort of a shocking demonstration of the first day of class, he'd just eat it. No, I'm not going to do that. Sorry. You'll have to find some other teacher to eat the moldy bread. Not going to do it. But some molds we like. Like we like, there are some things that we like. Blue cheese, Roquefort cheese are used with some molds. We like mushrooms. You can see a picture in your book of a mushroom farmer. And at that mushroom convention, they had where you could buy little kits, start your own mushroom farm. They had little kits that you could buy the starters so you could start making your own mushrooms. Club fungi are like mushrooms. There's also sac fungi like yeast. Yeast are single cellular. How they reproduce is by budding. They just make a little boop on the side and then it breaks off and it goes and grows into a whole new yeast. So that would be asexual reproduction. Penicillin is also a sac-like fungus. So very important. Probably saved lots of lives through antibiotics with penicillin. Another thing is lichen, and lichen they used to say was a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an algae. Now they say it's mutualism, but it's basically the same idea that these two organisms help each other or they live together. And that's what it's talking about in Star Wars with the midichlorians, that's a symbiotic relationship with the host. So it's just talking about two organisms that live together and it's mutually beneficial. So with the lichen, you can see it in your book, that is either a green algae or a blue-green bacteria that have chlorophyll that can make the food. And then the fungus gives that organism, the one that's making the food, protection and moisture. You know how those, algae and blue-green bacteria normally live in water, but they can live on the side of a tree where it's dry if they're protected by the fungus. And the fungus gives it support and structure. So they have a relationship where they're able to live together. And also lichens are important because they produce acids that help break down things. And that's why you see them growing on decaying stuff a lot of times. Some lichen are important for food, and they talk about how reindeer and caribou eat reindeer, it's called reindeer moss, but it's a lichen. So you're going to also do the lab on page 109 where you're going to dissect a fungus, a mushroom. If you don't have the book and you're just watching these videos and doing the class without the book, do what I said. Dissect a fungus, look at the parts of it, draw it, look at the other protozoa and look at them online if you don't have a microscope. But I think this is all really interesting. So part of of creation that you don't really think about that much, the mushrooms and the lichen and the single-celled organisms, but they have such great variety. It's very interesting. So come back next time and we're going to talk about plants. Like, share, subscribe, which would normally be written behind me because I have a goal, 1,000 subscribers, so I don't have to record it and then upload it. You know, I have a dream, so help me out with that. And share it with your homeschool friends that they can have biology. And I'll see you next time. Science is great.